Greetings, everyone. It's your host, Danny Haifong. I am back live streaming after a bit of time away. I've been keeping updates on this channel of what is happening with the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. We're going to get started because we have a huge panel today. But let us begin with how this has been a historic week. The world now stands at the brink of what could become the most significant war in modern history. Tel Aviv, as we speak, is under heavy Iranian missile fire, with Tel Aviv taking a beating worse than anything Israel has experienced in its brief colonial existence. Iran has unleashed its first-generation Fatah hypersonic missiles, capable of speeds of upward of 10,000 to 15,000 miles per hour, designed to evade high-end missile defenses. Iran says its operations are only the beginning and could now control Israeli skies, while Israel says they have air dominance over Iran as it targets civilian areas with deadly consequences. Trump is threatening to take out the supreme leader, and the world is bracing for the U.S.'s potential full entrance into a war that it's been facilitating from the start. How do we understand this moment, and where exactly is this conflict going as we enter a first full week of hostilities? Well, joining us is our very special panel today. We have Ali Abunimah from the Electronic Intifada, Professor Mohammad Marandi joining from Tehran, and we also have Lowkey here today, journalist and activist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, let us begin with you, Professor Mohammad Marandi. I know that things have been quite difficult in some respects, but I would definitely like to get your impressions of what has been going on, how this has affected you in particular, but also if you could speak to how Iran's response has been taking shape thus far, especially in the latest hours as we brace for potential U.S. Intervention, a deeper intervention than the one we have already been witnessing.
Well, as you may have heard, a few hours ago, the Israeli regime struck the Red Crescent building in Tehran, which again shows that that they have absolutely no red lines. Of all the buildings that you could hit in Tehran, they had to go and find the Red Crescent building. And then in Isfahan, we had airstrikes where they targeted two cars with two families, murdering them, including one woman who was about to give birth to a child. A couple of days ago, they bombed a hospital in Kermanshah in the west of Iran. The Israelis have been using Syria and parts of Iraq for their agents to fire drones into Iran. Some say the Republic of Azerbaijan has also been used. I'm not sure about that one. I haven't asked. But there are also people in Iran who work as agents for the regime, and they've been using drones to target people and to target buildings and to target radar or missile defense capabilities. There's been a huge public presence in Iran, and the public is helping the armed forces find these trucks and find these people. And a lot of people have been arrested. Many of them are not Iranian. Many of them are Iranian as well. So many are from the Afghan refugee population. But of course, it's a very large population. It doesn't mean that Afghans are in general involved with this. You can always find people who are very poor and impoverished and desperate who will do very disgraceful things anywhere in the world. I'm just telling you what the situation is in normal. Otherwise, Afghans in Iran have been respected people who've done a lot of good work in Iran over the years. And but the number of drone attacks, I think, are decreasing. Iran's air defenses are performing pretty well, but it's war. And Iran's missiles are being fired. They're scoring hits. And they are doing it in a way to tire the Israeli regime, but also to empty their missile defense capabilities, which for every missile that Iran fires, the Israelis spend 10, 15 times more than the Iranians spend in trying to bring down those missiles. So the situation right now, I think, is turning in favor of Iran. And that is exactly why the Trump regime is getting increasingly involved, and I think increasingly concerned about the future of the Israeli regime. You've heard that Israel is not allowing its people to leave, which I guess that you could call that using the population as human shields. But also, by the way, something that we haven't heard at all, and that is that the Israeli regime uses people as human shields because their missile defenses are all hidden in the side streets of Tel Aviv and other cities. So when Western media used to bark at the Palestinians about using people as human shields in Gaza, these same people have been muzzled or they are silent about the Israeli regime using people as human shields in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. They're completely silent about this sort of thing. But in any case, the Iranians are expecting the United States to attack. They don't believe a word that Trump says. He's sinister, he's dishonest, he's deceitful. And so the Iranians have prepared themselves. If the United States makes the stupid mistake of attacking, it will be far easier for Iran to deal with the US than for the Israeli regime. And that's because the Persian Gulf is, the Iranians own half of one side of the Persian Gulf, and it's not very wide. And Iran has been preparing for a US aggression for well over 2 decades. Iran's focus has been the United States, not Israel. Iran's focus has always been on the United States. So its defenses are designed to fight with the United States. So they have many underground missile and drone bases. They don't need these long-range missiles. They have many shorter-range missiles that'll destroy anything and everything on the other side of the Persian Gulf. The United States has bases across the Persian Gulf, and these regimes that are complicit, that host these bases, if there's war, Iranians see them as partners in crime. So that would be the end of the oil and gas market. It's not about shutting the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. There won't be any oil or gas produced to go through the Strait of Hormuz. There won't be any tankers left to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So this would be a global economic catastrophe that will be brought about because of Trump personally and the neocons and the Zionists. And if there is war, I don't think Trump will be able to serve his full term. And I think people in the United States will be deeply affected by the war, will be seeking out those neocons and Zionists who push the country towards catastrophe.
Yeah, appreciate your assessment, Professor Marandi. How about you, Ali? I wanted to bring it to you because I know I'm not going to publicly name where you are in the region, but I know you've been able to witness these missile strikes personally. If you're able to share where you've been and where you are, that's great. But talk to me about your impressions of what's been going on and the significance of all of this as the world is bracing for this war to continue to escalate. Not Professor Marandi, but Ali, please help us out here.
Thanks, Danny. And first, I greetings to Lowkey and especially to Professor Marandi, Dr. Marandi. I watched your interview with Judge Napolitano earlier today, and it was extremely moving and sobering that you, as many people in Iran, face real risks by continuing to speak out. We know that the Zionist regime is absolutely murderous. they have targeted and exterminated dozens of Palestinian intellectuals and journalists just for speaking about their crimes. And you are frank that risk exists, and I believe we owe you great respect for being willing to remain committed to your mission of speaking the truth and informing the world in the face of so much propaganda. So I want to thank you for that, and pray for your safety and the safety of everyone in Iran facing this brutal and criminal and illegal under international law aggression. Danny, just a few minutes before we started this show, I can tell you I'm in Jordan. That's not a secret. I've been saying that on social media. Just a few minutes before this show started, the air raid sirens went off in Amman, and I went up to the roof and I saw, as I have seen every night since this Israeli aggression started, Iranian missiles traveling across the sky towards occupied Palestine. And what I saw just a few minutes ago, I did post it on Twitter, was one of this new generation of Iranian missiles. I've become sort of a bit of an expert in Iranian missiles over the last few days and months. I was here during True Promise 2 on October 1st, 2024, and that was the first time we saw this incredible sight of hundreds of Iranian ballistic missiles streaming across the sky and interceptors going up, whether they're Israeli or American, attempting to stop them. And we did see the same types of missiles, these missiles that seem to appear further to the east. In other words, they're entering the atmosphere at a lower angle, and you see the Israeli interceptors go up from the west to meet them. And we have seen some of these missiles, but just since, I believe, yesterday morning, I've personally seen a new kind of missile that comes in so fast at such a high angle, it actually appears in the western sky over Palestine instead of in the eastern sky and then traveling overhead. And it comes in so fast that the interceptors have no time to go up. And the explosions that I heard yesterday were so loud that it's hard to believe they were all the way in Tel Aviv. It felt like they were much closer. You actually felt the ground shake here in Jordan. So that's just to give you a sense of what I'm seeing. Now, in terms of the developments, Danny, yesterday we had Donald Trump making these unhinged threats, demanding unconditional surrender, making these thuggish, gangsterish threats against the Iranian leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, that even the cheapest, most thuggish gangster would be ashamed to make. And it seemed certain that the U.S., that he was rushing back from the G7 in Calgary. It seemed to order the B-52s into the air to support this Israeli-American war of aggression with direct American bombing. Of course, Israel could do none of this without U.S. logistical and military and political support, but to actually send in the bombers. And today, just a couple of hours ago, we saw Donald Trump giving this kind of incoherent statement before the cameras saying, I don't know what I'll do. Nobody knows what I'll do. And I think what happened is he came back to Washington. They got him in the Situation Room. They sat him down and said, Mr. President, if you order us to start bombing Iran, we will do that. But here is all the things that will happen. And I think that that he had spent yesterday being inflated with this warlike zeal by Netanyahu, by the Zionist neocons around him, by the likes of Mike Huckabee, who basically told him that he's chosen by God. And then the U.S. Pentagon officials and the other people in the Situation Room basically deflated that balloon. And what we have just in the past couple of hours, we had Al Jazeera reporting a short time ago. They said that a U.S. official told Al Jazeera that nobody in the U.S. administration knows what Donald Trump is going to do. They're dealing with a mad king. That doesn't mean he's not going to do it. If I were in Iran, I would assume that the United States is going to attack. But we also had an Iranian official telling Al Jazeera that if the United States does enter this war directly, that Hezbollah would be likely to become active on the northern front. So in addition to all the other risks that Dr. Marandi talked about, the potential shutdown of the Persian Gulf, the Gulf regimes, shipping. Already ships are being warned. Reuters reported a short time ago that international shipping is being warned to stay away from the Persian Gulf. And we remember, at least I'm old enough to remember, I know Dr. Marandi is, that in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq war, when Iran was much weaker politically, it was able to effectively shut down shipping in the Persian Gulf with Exocet missiles, French Exocet missiles, but now Iran has its own technology, which is probably far superior. So there is a historical precedent for that, and I think those who have the historical knowledge and the memory will be aware of it and will be very wary of this. And the final thing I'll say here is we saw a poll come out from YouGov yesterday that every single demographic in the United States, Republicans, Democrats, young, old, across the political spectrum, is staunchly opposed to a direct U.S. military intervention on behalf of Israel in this war, and only a minority supports it. So he may also be realizing that this is a massive betrayal of his own base, not to mention the rest of the American people who he clearly doesn't care about. And so it is a high risk decision for the United States to enter even more directly into this war. But if I were sitting in Iran, I would assume they are going to do it, and I would prepare accordingly.
Yeah, and Lowkey, I want to get you in here because I definitely want your impressions of what you have noticed thus far with this situation, because it is becoming more dire. It is becoming more of a risk for the entire world, and I'm curious on what your impressions have been about this situation as it has developed.
Well, first of all, I wanted to extend my salutations to Professor Marandi. You are a hero to us. We love you. We love the people of Iran. We are thankful with all gratitude to the Islamic Republic of Iran for what it has presented as a service to the entirety of humanity. With the move to defend itself against the Zionist genocide, colony, and US imperialism, it has placed itself at the forefront as the leader, not only of Islamic civilization today, but of the entirety of humanity. It is fighting on behalf of the billions across the world who cannot stomach to see another day when a child in Gaza is scrambling for food. It cannot bear to see another day of human beings decapitated and beheaded by savagery. Iran is defending civilization, and it is fighting back against the savage rule of genocidal regime like Israel and the United States, and we will forever be grateful. You see, they misunderstand something basically about Iran. They believe that its connection and its geopolitical role is linked to what they call interests. But actually, if they really understood the history of how the Islamic revolution came into fruition, the deep relationship which existed prior to the Islamic revolution between those who launched it and the Palestinian organizations in Lebanon at the time. Of course, Abu Jihad Khalil Wazir, famous for being the head of intelligence for Fatah, one of the founders, is somebody that trained Iranians who later went on to launch the Islamic revolution. And after that, Iran has supported in a way that no other state in the world materially, not emotionally, not symbolically, not diplomatically, not with NGOs, not with documentaries, materially supported the Palestinian resistance, all factions, even Fatah, after the period when they diverged politically from each other. You look at the example of the Carrion A ship, which was caught going into Gaza. Talal al-Naji of the PFLP, who is currently imprisoned in Damascus by the Israeli-sponsored regime, once said that they knew about the Carrying A ship, but they didn't know about the 9 other ships that got into Gaza with arms from Iran for all of the Palestinian resistance factions. And that relationship has gone on throughout all of these decades. That is why Iran is targeted today. That is why Iranians are dying. That's why their children are being killed by Israel, because they have stood with the Palestinians and refused to let go of their hands. And that is an immense contribution to humanity. And also what they don't realize is they're not just dealing with a state, or even if they were to assume they were dealing with a war similar to the ones that they've waged on Gaza, on Lebanon, or on Yemen. No, they're dealing with a civilization thousands of years old, which a state has been built on top of it, which has a basis of resistance and anti-colonialism. There's a big difference when you are dealing with a state that has a long-term strategic comprehensive plan with China, investing billions into Iran. This is a completely different animal that Israel is actually shocked. Its own hubris. I saw the footage yesterday of Itamar Ben-Gvir being confronted by an Israeli saying to him, "Why did you do this? Why did you launch the attack on Iran?" He said, "We did not know. We did not know their missile capability." So this is the all-knowing Israel with its visual intelligence unit 9900 or its telecommunications unit 8200. They couldn't figure out the capability and the willingness to fight on the part of the Iranian people. And I would say there are 2 things happening which are very important. Number one, on the Iranian side, you have many groups and organizations who previously were basically campaigning to get rid of the government in what was an Israel-sponsored and US-sponsored regime change plan. Today, because of Israel's bombing, they are with the government more than they have ever been at any time previously. Now, what's happening on the other side? Mass demoralization of the Israeli society. You have to understand the basis of the Zionist genocide of Palestine has been an inequality of arms. An inequality of arms. In order for Israel to exist the way it does with this social imbalance, it had to be massively over-advantaged in terms of the monopoly on violence against Palestinians. And it's always sought to fight on that basis. And therefore, its population has grown used to that equation. It has grown used to, really, if they do military service, bullying some 80-year-old grandmas at checkpoints, or operating drones and never getting near to the people they fight. When they have to kill people in Nablus, Arin al-Asud, when they killed some of these young men in Nablus, they literally just sent machine drones into the room with the individual where the drone killed the person. This is the type of military experience that they have. They have never been in a situation. 4 generations of my family have had this view of Zionism and fighting Zionism as A, an important thing for them to do, but B, an almost invincible enemy. They could never have conceived of the visions that we have seen, of the scenes that we have seen over these last few days. And the Israelis themselves could not conceive of them. And so now we have a situation where if you are an Israeli today, you are very likely thinking of a second location to move to, because you have the option. If you are an Iranian today, you are closer to your government and have more pride in your belonging than you have ever had before. Those are 2 contradictory motions which are pushing. Why is it that the Israeli government has to tell its citizens that they cannot leave the country? Because they fear the Algeria equation. They fear that because these people have other places to go, they will go there when this situation becomes as it is. Why is it that you have Israelis fleeing from the by sea to try and get out? Because their sense of belonging, their sense of safety is shaken, and their tolerance for a situation like this is extremely low because they've become used to a certain way of interacting with the rest of the world and with the region. And it is important to emphasize here that there are billions of people across the world who have been begging for some form of humanitarian intervention to stop what is happening in Gaza, for somebody to push back, for somebody to fight back, and Iran did. That is a position which will echo through the centuries of time. It is not just that Iran has supported all of the resistance factions in a very modest way. And I don't mean modest in terms of number. I mean modest in terms of attitude. It was not something Iran boasted about. It was not something Iran expected thanks for, or gratitude for, or anything in return. But today, Iran has established clarity across the world. When all of your rulers were cowards, when all of your rulers were collaborators, when all of your rulers were traitors, Iran wasn't. Now, that is a position which will echo throughout time, and people will feel those reverberations. The courage is contagious. And when people have seen this, they want to stand up to themselves. So this has been an incredible time to be alive, actually. And all of our hopes and prayers are with the Iranian people. May God keep them safe. May God protect them from all of the schemes of the enemies of humanity. And we really extend our, honestly, Professor Marandi has done such a great job at facing down some of the most extreme ghouls of Israel's propaganda war, from Piers Morgan to others. I was personally disgusted by the way he treated you several days ago, and so it's great to see you here in a more friendly environment for sure.
Yeah, well, Professor Marandi, I definitely want to get you back in here. The scenes that Lowkey has just laid out, I mean, I could even add to them. We see Israelis sleeping in the metro stations. We have heard from Israeli officials themselves about the extensive damage of Iran's missile attacks, 14,000 plus sites hit. We saw what's been happening in Haifa, the lights being turned out there. We are now witnessing, as we talk, Tel Aviv being hit again, and Tel Aviv is essentially shut down because in this condition, there is no way to continue to operate, especially since, as Lowkey said, Israel's some of its strongest missile defenses are located there in Tel Aviv. And as you said earlier, this is the case. So talk about this contrast, though, because on the other side, we have seen Israel target civilians. We have seen, of course, Israel target the media, the Iranian Broadcasting Corporation, which directly affected you. So talk about that experience, as well as this contrast of, Israel is targeting civilians. Iran says over 270 have been killed. This has greatly affected your life. It's come very close to you. So maybe you can pick up here.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the three of you for very kind words. And I salute all of you for all the great work that you've done in very hostile environments. And I think that your hard work and the work of many others alongside you has really changed the situation in the West. And now you see young Americans, young Europeans, young British citizens waking up and being increasingly active. Recently, we saw that young Hindu woman, I think she was Hindu from her name, at MIT. We see young Jews, we see young Christians, Muslims, people from all walks of life rising up and creating awareness. And it is really a great time to be alive and to be able to witness this this wave of humanity turning the tide against the tyrants of our era. And we have to, by the way, before I continue, remember, we have to keep in mind that as we speak, the genocide continues, the Holocaust continues. The focus on the Islamic Republic of Iran should not make us forget that Every day they're slaughtering people at these aid points. Every single day they're gunning them down. Now they're using tanks to destroy people. I tweet some of these. Our friends across the world are tweeting these or putting them on social media because Western media won't show them. Western media is hiding the facts. It's happening day and night. They're in support of this. Western governments support this. Otherwise, they'd be talking about it. It's the most outrageous thing possible. And there's footage of it coming out every single day, but nothing. That shows how compromised these people are, how compromised these journalists are from the legacy media. We should always keep in mind that this is all about Palestine and the Palestinian people and their dignity and their honor. They are equal human beings to anyone else on this planet, especially these Zionists. But they have no value in the eyes of the West. It's utterly amazing. It's utterly shocking. It's still difficult for me to understand how sometimes when I speak to some of these journalists, I have this hope that this time maybe he or she will change, but nothing, absolutely nothing. It is interesting sometimes when I speak to some of these people, some of them, then in private, they're very different, but in public, they're not going to acknowledge the sort of things that they know are true. So let's go back to IRB, the Iranian National Television and Radio Broadcaster. I have tweeted two different women, one on radio and one, the more famous one on TV, who was speaking as the building was being bombed. 4 missiles hit the building. And they continued. 2 women, one radio, I forget the name of the radio channel, and one was on Channel 1 News. These 2 heroic women, do you think in the West they would say anything about the courage of Iranian women against this Zionist, murderous Zionist attack? These steadfast women who've changed the mood in Iran through their resilience and their bravery, through their courage, through their dignity and their honor, live in front of the whole country. One of the women who was on radio was saying, "Congratulations to us for our martyrdom." She was speaking live. I tweeted that too. This is what the regime is against. This is what the regime in Washington is against. A resilient people who won't back down. They will defend their rights, their honor, their dignity, their rights, their sovereignty, and they will defend the Palestinian people. The Israeli regime has exposed itself to the world as cruel, as sinister, as evil, but today, due to their resilience, they have shown themselves to be deeply, deeply vulnerable. And that's the only reason why Trump has stepped forward. The only reason. Remember on day one when Trump was gloating about the situation? The night before, he pretended not to know and to be against war, and it turned out that it was all a lie and deception. The stupidity of this man. And then the next day he was gloating. Well, why isn't he gloating now? Why isn't he gloating now? Because Iran has shown the world that the global South can defeat the monsters that the West create, the colonizers, the killers, the genocidal maniacs that they impose upon us. That they can develop sophisticated weapons under sanctions. And remember, Iran is confronting a coalition of countries. The entire West is behind the Israeli regime. and regional countries, every single one of them complicit, every single one of them, except for Yemen. And by the way, to add to what was said about Hezbollah, Yemen has also said that they will close the Red Sea if the United States attacks. And just to correct something that Ali said, Iran was able to knock out ships in the Persian Gulf with light arms in the 1980s. The Iraqis had the exocet missiles that France gave to them. But Iran back then with primitive, because it was the beginning of the revolution, and the West and the Soviet bloc together, they imposed a war on Iran when the country was not ready. The Shah never developed an infrastructure for the country. It was like a Saudi Arabia spending oil on stupid projects and on themselves. But Iran then began to develop its indigenous military capabilities alongside other capabilities, nanotechnology, stem cell research, AI. One of the first people that the Israeli regime killed was a professor of AI. They murdered artists. They murdered doctors. They've murdered all sorts of people from all walks of life in Iran during the last few days. But the Iranians have shown that they have been able to, under sanctions, under maximum pressure sanctions, they've been able to continue to support the people of Palestine, but also to strengthen themselves. So while the region is complicit, and while the West is united, they still cannot defeat Iran. And now Trump knows that if he attacks Iran, he will face a catastrophe that the United States has never before experienced in its history. I have no doubt about that. I have no doubt about that. Iran is fully prepared to defend itself. Iran's defenses have been designed for the last 2 years more to defend itself against the United States than against the Israeli regime. The focus has always been on an American attack because that's been expected for well over 2 decades. When the United States took Afghanistan and then Iraq and surrounded Iran, when it was the hyperpower, Iran began to develop a defense doctrine to protect itself against the United States. So Iran's defense positions alongside the Persian Gulf and deep inside the country with short range and medium range missiles, which will reach their targets on the other side of the Persian Gulf much more swiftly, much less expensive, many more bases, drones and missiles. The damage that Iran can do to the United States and its proxies in the region will be immediate and very destructive and very easy for the Iranians. So while the Iranians have been able to punish the Israeli regime, and remember, it was a surprise attack. And this is another interesting thing. Look how Western media works. For over 20 months, they've been carrying out a Holocaust. And the Western media was protecting them. People like Piers Morgan, not just him, so many others were lying month after month after month about beheaded babies, lying about rapes, lying about the hundreds of Israelis that were murdered by the Israeli regime itself in order to justify genocide, in order to help the genocide continue. Western leaders, elites, the media, they were helping the regime. And then gradually, even though the United States, the people in the United States are the most propagandized people in the world, and the Europeans not so much behind them, not far behind them, people began to wake up. And the Israeli regime grew more and more crazy, as we're seeing now, them murdering people every day, trying to get aid, gunning them down. So recently we saw the Western elite, some people in the Western media begin to criticize the regime and attack the regime. So what happens? The regime attacks Iran. Unprovoked, illegal. And we know Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. The IAEA has admitted so much. We know that Netanyahu has been lying since 1992 when he claimed Iran was going to develop a nuclear weapon in 3 years. And he's been saying that Iran will develop a weapon in days, or in weeks, or months, or a couple of years ever since then. We know it's a lie. Western media knows it's a lie. But what did they do? They suddenly started to glorify the Israeli regime, saying how sophisticated this onslaught was. They didn't say it's an unprovoked aggression. They wanted to show how sophisticated they are, the threat coming from Iran, looming from Iran, to justify the same thing that they did in Gaza. And also to distract attention away from Gaza. Now they could present again from scratch, present the Israeli regime in a different light. But what did they do? Was it really all that sophisticated? On the first night, in one building that's not very far from my house, it's not actually walking distance, but it's not that far. It's actually somewhat of a walking distance from a studio that I sometimes go to for international interviews. They struck a building to target 1 or 2 senior officers, and they killed everyone. 65 people slaughtered, including over 20 babies. Is that something, or children? Is that something that Western media spoke about? No, they spoke about the sophisticated way in which Mossad and the military intelligence and the military carried out these precise operations. What's so precise? Is it a secret where people live? Senior officials that are on TV? They go to their homes at night. I go to my home at night. Do people in my neighborhood know where I live? Of course they do. And that's one reason why I try to stay away from home these days, because security officers have asked me to get rid of my phone. But I told them that if I get rid of my phone, I can't do interviews anymore. So I try to, for example, right now I'm in Press TV again, doing this interview. It's an evacuated building, but at least, the internet here is a bit better, so it's the only place I can do it. And at least I'm not putting too many people at risk. But in any case, it's no secret where these people live, bombing their homes at night. If the West tries to glamorize, just like they always do, the capabilities of the Israeli regime, well, let's look at the situation now. Despite this sudden attack and killing senior Iranian officers, it's extraordinary how quickly the Iranians regrouped. They put in new commanders. Within hours, they were able to revive the air defenses and revive and begin the counter-assault. And they're getting better and better, because now these people are getting to know their new position and their new role that they're playing. And we will not lose. We will definitely defeat the regime. We are determined not to allow aggressors to get their way. The regime will be forced to recognize that this was a catastrophic mistake. And the regime in Washington, if it enters, it will pay the price. I have no doubt that if the United States enters this fight, Trump will either be removed from office or he will have to find a way to step down, because Iran will not relent. There is not a chance in the world that Iran will relent. So I'm optimistic. These are dark days. It's painful to see people killed, just like it's been dark for all of us for the last 20, 21 months now because of Gaza and the genocidal attacks in Lebanon. And it's disgusting and saddening to see how Western media has behaved throughout all of this. I remember when I went to Lebanon as soon as the fighting began, literally it was the second night or third night, I was supposed to go on Al Jazeera. And right before me, the Al Jazeera reporter who was brought to Beirut, this woman started bad-mouthing Iran live on air as apartment blocks were being brought down in Beirut. She was saying how evil Iran is and how they violate human rights. What does that have to do with the Israeli attack? And then when I came on air, instead of answering the question, I protested. That's Al Jazeera. Imagine how the rest of them are. The rest of them, they were constantly saying Hezbollah targets, Hezbollah strongholds. Journalists in Beirut, Western journalists in Beirut, for legacy media. Whereas they knew they were lying. Why? Because they had fixers who were Lebanese. They had producers who were Lebanese. They had drivers who were Lebanese. Some of them lived in those neighborhoods. Some of them lived in those cities and towns. They knew that these were just ordinary apartment buildings that the Israelis were bombing. It's called the Dahiya Doctrine. In other words, destroy everything, crush everyone. A few days ago, the Israeli defense minister, minister of genocide, said that he will burn Tehran. Before that, it was burning Beirut, burning Gaza. What sort of monsters are these? What sort of monsters are we dealing with? Of course, Iran is not Beirut. Tehran is not Beirut. Tehran is not Gaza. And now we're seeing the power of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran did not want to provoke any war. Iran does not want war. Iran does not want people across the world to live in fear of a global economic meltdown. It is the United States and the Israeli regime that have imposed this on the world. They've imposed a genocide in Gaza. They imposed genocidal attacks in Lebanon. They imposed ISIS and Al-Qaeda on Syria. They imposed so many things on this region. They are the ones to blame. And Iran has been very careful to make sure that the world sees who's to blame, especially with the immense power that the Western media has always had, which is crumbling today before our eyes. So I am optimistic. I am optimistic. These are all very painful, as I said, painful to all of us. I remember sometimes listening to Electronic Intifada, and as Ali's colleagues would explain the events of the day, it would make me emotional and listeners emotional. And this was happening every single day and night. And the Western media was saying October the 7th. It's extraordinary. They bombed Iranian radio and television. I was sitting here, right here. The guard asked me to leave. Everyone was leaving the building because this building is a part of that broader, that organization. And I yelled at the poor guy. And I said, I have an important interview. And they made me wait. I was supposed to speak earlier. My intervention came much later. They saw me yelling at him. They saw me pleading and yelling. The young guy, he wanted me to be safe. And then he sat right here in front of me. I said, I'm not leaving until you go. And I said, no, I can't. I didn't want to risk his life. So I yelled at him. Ultimately, he said, okay, I'll wait for you downstairs. I said, I'll leave as soon as I finish. And then this Morgan, this pros who was having his nice conversation with these Zionist monsters, comes and attacks Iran and demonizes Iran and makes all sorts of garbage accusations against Iran. Why? Because he wants to demonize the Iranians just like he demonized Gaza, to justify genocide. He did the same in Lebanon to justify the genocidal strikes on Lebanon. And he's not alone. So I waited for him under the threat, not because I'm brave, it's my responsibility. I can't do anything else. And then he starts talking, and I think you know that some of our mutual friends have just visited Iran George Galloway, Max Blumenthal, among many others. Max stayed in Iran for 2 weeks, traveled on his own throughout the country. People can look at his reports and the reports of others and see, I invited this monster, Pierce Morgan, to come to Iran, and he insulted me. And then he made accusations like I would arrest him or have him arrested and tortured or something. Instead of thanking me, he accuses me, and then he insults the country. Of course, even if he came to Iran, nothing would change because these people don't change. They have an agenda. They get money for this. If he changes, then he loses his job, and that's everything for him. And it's not him. He's just one person. He's a showman with no principles, no morality, no red lines like Netanyahu. They're all the same. But there are many like them. But the young people in the United States and Europe, any other people, these young students, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, they are turning the tide. And outside of the West, things are very different. So these are dark days, but I'm optimistic. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We have to remain resilient, and we have to keep the focus on the Palestinians who are being murdered in Gaza.
Yeah, well, no, very well said, Professor Marandi. Very well said. Now, Ali, I'd like to bring you back in here, and we can, of course, circle back around to you, Professor Marandi, because I definitely want your answer to this. Over the course of the last few days, we've seen Donald Trump make direct threats toward Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Said, we're not going to take him out now, at least for now, but we know where he is. Patience is wearing thin. Then he says, well, good luck to him after this is what Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had to say to the Iranian people. He said, quote, the Americans must know the Iranian people will not surrender or submit to threats and diktats. The U.S. knows that the intervention in Israeli aggression on Iran will leave them far more damaged than anything they could do to Iran. So, Ali, could you talk about, because this is a regime change war, talk about what your reaction to this is and how you see things moving as we go forward here.
Thanks, Danny. And yeah, I want to thank Dr. Marandi for everything he said and also for correcting me because I realized my own mistake. I was going to say Iran was able to shut down the Persian Gulf with speedboats. It was Iraq that had the Exocet missiles. This was during the so-called tanker war of the 1980s. And so we know that Iran has sophisticated anti-ship missiles now that would be used against any naval force that comes to fight against Iran. And those would be the risks that would be placed in front of President Trump if he's able to assess them and to make rational decisions, which is very hard to believe. But yes, I think regime change is the goal here, and it fits into the wider goal, the long-standing neocon Zionist goal of destroying any independent country or force that can challenge Israeli domination and American domination, because the two go hand in glove. There is no Israel without the United States, and so you need the United States to dominate the region for Israel to remain as this brutal, genocidal Western Sparta. I don't know, that's an insult to the Spartans, but I don't know, this Western colony of terror and genocide and racism. And so it's hard to know the extent to which the Zionists believe their own lies, but the lie has always been that the Palestinians fighting for their liberation, the Lebanese people fighting for the liberation of their land and the sovereignty of their country, that anyone who defends their country, defends their people, defends their lives against this colonial assault, that they're just puppets of Iran, that Palestinians are going out and fighting and dying just because they were paid from Iran, that students on the Columbia campus are going out and expressing solidarity and setting up encampments to protest a horrific genocide because Iran paid them. This simplistic, crude thinking. But I think it's penetrated their skulls to the extent that they believe it, or enough of them believe it, that they think that by destroying Iran, they will destroy all resistance across the region to this brutal genocidal Zionist project. And of course, the opposite is the case. Resistance will only increase. And what we've seen for 20 months in Gaza, coming on to 21 months, is that the resistance has never surrendered. The United States put and the Israelis put ultimatum after ultimatum, but the resistance stuck to its bottom line. We want an end to the war. We want our people to live. We want a permanent end to the war. We want our people to receive aid. We want the Israeli army out of Gaza. They've never deviated, no matter what Israel has done to them, including these horrific massacres where Israel is now killing. A number I saw earlier today, which is probably now out of date, that they'd killed more than 150 people in Gaza in the previous 24 hours. And these horrific massacres, which aren't being seen because there has been, for the past almost a week now, an intermittent but pretty consistent internet blackout to Gaza, just as is now happening to Iran, which is almost certainly a result of cyber attacks. The Iranian news agency website is down. I have no doubt that they'll be able to get it back up. But this is all an attempt to silence, to murder and silence the people who are the victims of this aggression. And of course, it's not going to work. Just remember that just, weeks ago, Donald Trump went in and vowed that Ansarullah in Yemen would be totally annihilated. Those were his words. And yet, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. military, which threw everything it had at Yemen, which is the poorest country in the Arab world, which has been the subject of 9 years or 10 years, a decade of American-backed genocidal bombing by the Saudis, the Emiratis, backed by the British, backed by the French, that this country defeated the United States, and Trump retreated and basically gave up on trying to stop Yemen from intervening militarily as it has been to prevent or to try to stop the genocide in Gaza. So that's the big picture here. This has nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction or Iranian nuclear weapons, just as the Iraq war had nothing to do with non-existent Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. This war has nothing to do with a non-existent Iranian nuclear weapon. I mean, there are many people who I think very reasonably regret that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, because that would be the thing that would have deterred this aggression. But even without that nuclear weapon, I think people across the region, even those who have been propagandized for years about how it's not Israel that's the threat to us, it's those nasty Shiites in Iran, are waking up to how much they've been lied to, how much they've been propagandized. And the real enemy of the West and the Zionists is any people or any country that defends its sovereignty, independence, and dignity, no matter who they are in the world. That's the enemy. That's why the United States murdered Salvador Allende in Chile. That's why the United States overthrew Mohammad Marandi, the elected and popular leader of Iran in the 1950s, and installed the Shah. That's why the United States has opposed democracy in every part of the world for its entire history, in Central America, in Latin America, in Africa, in Palestine. When they had elections in 2006, the United States and Israel and Arab governments intervened to overthrow the democratic choice of the Palestinian people. The enemies of democracy who preach about democracy are the West. And this is why they're doing this. And we have to see the big picture, and we have to understand what's at stake here. And now those who say, the talk about negotiation is meaningless. You can't negotiate with the United States. You couldn't negotiate with the United States before Donald Trump was there. How can you negotiate with the United States under a man who doesn't know what he's doing from hour to hour? How could any agreement stand? But suppose that Iran and the United States did sign some sort of agreement that they were both satisfied with. We already have the precedent of what would happen with Iraq in the 1990s, when Iraq did agree to whatever terms the US imposed to inspect for non-existent weapons of mass destruction. They signed the agreement, they set up this inspection regime, and then that becomes the excuse and the mechanism and the weapon. Oh, you're not letting our inspectors in. Oh, you're hiding things. Oh, we need to come and see this. Oh, you fiddled with the cameras. Oh, you did this, you did that. Everything becomes a pretext for a war. And that's what they did with Iraq. And even though Iraq complied with everything in the 1990s, and Hans Blix, the chief UN inspector at the time, who was a coward because he would never say clearly, he would always fudge it. But basically, he would go to the Security Council, report after report after report, and say, there's nothing. Iraq has nothing. You'd have to read between the lines because he was too scared of the American bosses to say it clearly. But even Mohammad Marandi, who was at that time the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, went to the Security Council and said, Iraq has no nuclear program. There's nothing there. Just as the IAEA is saying now that even the Western-dominated, Western-controlled International Atomic Energy Agency is saying now Iran has no nuclear program. There's no nuclear weapons program, rather. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence of Donald Trump, said, this came out in the last few days very clearly, it was reported by CNN, that the assessment of the US so-called intelligence community was very clear, that Iran has no nuclear weapon and is not pursuing a nuclear weapon and is not close to possessing a nuclear weapon. But you heard Donald Trump yesterday on the plane back from Calgary, after whoever whispered in his ear, saying, I don't care what Tulsi Gabbard said. I believe they're close to a bomb. So this man is totally susceptible to whatever BS Netanyahu or the other ultra-Zionist neocon fanatics are whispering in his ear, and who are determined to finish off Iran using the pretext of weapons of mass destruction. But it's not about nuclear weapons. It is about whether this region, from Palestine to Iran, I mean, you could draw the region even wider, maybe from the Atlantic, from Morocco to Afghanistan, will be free, sovereign, and independent, in control of its land, its people in control of their destinies and their resources and their futures. That's what it's about. And the United States and the Western Zionist Empire will never permit that if they can find a way to stop it. That's what's at stake here, nothing less.
Yeah, Lowkey, please jump right in.
I think it's important to point out that part of Donald Trump's sale has been that he is independent, that MAGA is not the neocons. He went to Saudi Arabia and he said clearly the neocons tried to make the region in their image and they failed. He has a base which is isolationist, anti-intervention. However, when you look at who is behind the war on Iran in the United States, in a nuts and bolts, micro to macro way, you find almost exactly the same figures that were behind the war in Iraq. And what do I mean by that? If you look at United Against the Nuclear Iran, a key lobby group that's been working for a very long time to push the United States into war with Iran, this organization is literally led by Jeb Bush, the brother of George Bush. Who else is in the leadership position at this organization? Mark Wallace, who was the US ambassador at the United Nations at the time of the Iraq war. Who else is involved in the organization? Mir Dagan, who was the head of Israel's external intelligence agency, Mossad, at the time of the Iraq war. So what you see is the neocons refusing to die and pushing around someone like Donald Trump, who has really misled his base. His base voted for him on the basis that he was not the same as these individuals. But the neocons have stayed in place and continue to push him around and are working to move him around. I tell you one thing that the Mike Huckabee text message seems to reveal to me is that Huckabee, who is really from the most extreme part of the Zionist movement, but he's the US ambassador to Israel somehow, is pushing Trump to use a nuclear weapon on Iran. Why is that? Because there is a realization among the Israelis, and I'm telling you, it's hitting them like a ton of bricks. I've never seen Benjamin Netanyahu look the way he has in these recent interviews. Internally, this is a broken man. And I used to think he wouldn't politically survive this period. I don't think he's going to physically survive this period, to be honest with you. Netanyahu, one way or another, will be left in a coffin by this period and by this war. And the realization which is dawning upon him is that in Iran, you have a system in which the brilliance of several generations of Iranians has been poured into preparing for this eventuality. It's known that one day, if you want to build an independent state, you will be visited by the United States. Israel will try to stop you because you've helped these Palestinian fighters for all of these decades. So prepare. Now, the preparation for that has meant that Iran has the capability to fight a war of attrition with Israel. Israel does not have the capability to, it doesn't even have the capability to fight a war of attrition with Hamas in Gaza. That's the simple fact. Israel has not been able to achieve its objectives in Gaza. It wasn't able to achieve its objectives in Lebanon. So are we supposed to believe that Israel can achieve its objectives against the 17th largest country in the world, with a landmass the size of Western Europe, with a population of 100 million people, that has been preparing for this point? It's not going to happen. So the United States either needs to get involved in a major way, which of course will lead to the shutting of Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea, the shutting of Strait of Hormuz, the disabling of the oil platforms in the region, and the paralyzing of the global economy. So that is the choice for Trump. He has that choice. Either he disciplines Israel, forces it to retreat, or submits it to the fate that it has built for itself in this region, surrounded by people it has wronged, surrounded by people it has oppressed, surrounded by literal siblings of people it has murdered and killed to exist, or he accepts the collapse of the global economy. That's the choice which sits in front of Donald Trump today, and why this is an impossible equation for them, and a circle that they cannot square ultimately. So when you look also at the regimes in the region, I think also a realization is dawning upon them. They've spent this time with the genocide in Gaza quietly collaborating with Israel. You literally have a company like Third Eye Systems, which has the Ghost Soldier project, which is sent in to aid the Israeli military in its operations inside Gaza. This is an Israeli company that uses an AI program called Ghost Soldier to help work out the correct routes for Israeli soldiers to take. That's 30% owned by the UAE government through the Edge Group. These regimes in the region are collaborating with Israel, but now they are not only faced with an equation which is going to imperil them in the very close future, in the near future, and if I was them, I would be lobbying Trump frantically not to get involved in the war against Iran. But on the other hand, you have a population, these governments govern populations that can see all the same images that we have, that have the same feelings that we have, and that are increasingly feeling a sense of despair with the inaction of their own government and the impotence of their regime to face off this Zionist genocide in Gaza. So really the situation is pregnant with possibility, and the ball is ultimately in the court of Donald Trump. But you know, if I studied his list of funders, and actually I think there was a mistake made by many on our side by focusing solely on the Adelson money. While the Adelson money was the second largest funder after Elon Musk, all the rest of his funders were serious Zionists. You are talking about individuals like Paul Singer, who's historically one of the key funders to the Republican Party, the head of Elliott Management, which is a key investment firm, which was actually top shareholder in some of the builders of the F-35. Paul Singer literally also builds settlements and invests in the Friends of the IDF charity for the Israeli military. Robert Hooke, that's another individual that's another individual that funded Donald Trump. Really, a plethora of Zionist money, of Zionist funders were involved in this campaign for Trump. And so ultimately, it's viewed that they are coming to collect. They view him as indebted to them. And part of his sell to them was, I gave you Jerusalem. I gave you the Golan Heights. I gave you everything on a silver platter. Now, what Trump was meant to do was give them Gaza, give them the West Bank, and give them Iran. And with giving them the West Bank, give them Al-Aqsa as well. Now, he can't even give them Gaza. And the amazing thing about Trump and the way that his interaction is with Netanyahu, you know, a letter was released by the Israeli media around a decade or so ago, which revealed, with Benjamin Netanyahu's own handwriting, a list of largely people based in the US, individuals who he saw as potential funders of his political campaign. Now, listed on that was Rupert Murdoch, of course, a longtime employer of Piers Morgan, but also Donald Trump was listed on that. So Donald Trump is suspected to have been a funder of Benjamin Netanyahu's first political campaign to become prime minister. Their relationship is deep and long and well established. But the fascinating part of the story now is that you have Netanyahu able to put under Trump's name Zionist objectives. Why is it that you would have them calling this the Trump plan to depopulate Gaza? It's not a Trump plan. Trump didn't think that up. Trump has no emotional investment in it. The Zionists came to him and said, this is our plan. We want you to put your name onto it to give us more legitimacy with what we want to do. And so now, rather than them take the step of trying to use a nuclear weapon, they're trying to push Trump to put his name to the use of a nuclear weapon on Iran, sealing his reputation in history as one of the great killers. And so that's really what they're trying to push him to do right now, the most extreme things possible. And so he's caught between a rock and a hard place. And if, like one of his top funders, you have to remember, Miriam Adelson was his second largest funder. His top largest funder was Elon Musk. Now, if Elon Musk can invest over $120 million in a politician and then come onto Twitter and allege that that politician has a key role in the Epstein files, now this is quite extreme, quite crazy what we're talking about here. And yes, he was a good friend of Epstein. He flew at least 7 times on his flight. He visited him over 10 times. That's documented. What does that mean in the wider picture? I'm not sure. But Donald Trump is in a battle for his soul right now. And Iran seemingly is the object of that battle. So what the next steps will be, I don't know. But I'm sure that he doesn't want it put on his name that he was the one that dropped the nuclear weapon on Iran, God forbid, or he was the one that wrecked the global economy.
Yeah, all very good points. I had one final question for you all, if you have a bit more time. I wanted to ask, first going to Professor Marandi. You know, there's a lot of talk and speculation, of course, with all of these threats coming through against Iran from the United States and, of course, from Israel, that Iran will suffer the same fate as Syria, for example, or how some have interpreted what happened to Hezbollah in Lebanon, the need to come to a ceasefire there after the major genocidal aggression on Lebanon that is still ongoing. And of course, the narrative of Hamas and the Palestinian resistance being decimated by 20 plus months of genocide. What do you say to those right now, given that you are there? This has a deep impact on you. Iranian people are facing difficult times amid these threats. What do you say to those who have this thought or fear? Because I do sense that there's a lot of fear of Iran's potential downfall over the long course of this a war led by the U.S. and Israel. Your thoughts?
Well, first, I'd like to say something, and then I'll get to this. I'll be very brief. It's something about the International Atomic Energy Agency that your audience should know, because it will come up, and it has already come up. And that is that, as Ali, I was listening to him, he pointed out, it is Western controlled, it's Western dominated. Like all international institutions that were created after the Second World War, they're all Western controlled. The International Atomic Energy Agency's Board of Governors, which is a political entity, it's dominated by Western powers. So on the board, if I'm not mistaken, 17 of the 35, they are North American and European. So about half. They're just Europe and the United States, one small segment of humanity. And the vote against Iran was, I think, 20 against Iran, the statement or the declaration that we had a few days ago that was against Iran. It was 20 against 15. So it sounds like the majority of the world is against Iran, but 17 of those countries, Western European and North American, Canada, the United States. The other three, Japan in the US camp, controlled by the United States, Korea, controlled by the United States. In fact, once I was invited to Korea by the deputy foreign minister at the time. And when I met him, before we began to speak, he said to me, look, he was the person in charge of Africa and West Asia. So I don't know if he's the deputy foreign minister or he had a high rank, but we had a conversation. And at the very beginning, he said, look, I have to make this clear. We're not an independent country. That's how our conversation began. So Japan, Korea, and Argentina, you know, the guy with the chainsaw. So these were the 20 votes. The overwhelming majority of humanity did not vote for this resolution. China, negative. India did not vote for it. Russia, and so on. Brazil. So this is a political body. But other than that, and the head of the organization, if you go back to WikiLeaks, and you can check DeepSeek, I checked DeepSeek and found, and I knew it, but you know, I'm growing old and I start to forget things, so I checked DeepSeek. Amino, who was the previous head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, when he wanted to be a candidate, this has been exposed by WikiLeaks. Thank you, Julian Assange, and we have to thank all those people who worked with him. They showed that Amino was, when he was a candidate to become the head of the organization, he told the Americans, I will be with you on all key issues. I am your man. And that's how he got elected. The current head of the organization, according to the documents that the Iranians have found, and of course, based upon the obvious, he's an American agent. He works for the Americans. But even he has said that we don't have evidence of any military program, military component to Iran's peaceful nuclear program. Yet Donald Trump, despite everything, Netanyahu, with all those lies, they're pushing. The issue is not the nuclear program. The issue is not human rights. It's not terrorism. It's all about dignity, sovereignty, independence, and support for Palestine. It's being opposed to ethno-supremacism. It's being opposed to racism and ethnic cleansing. That's what makes us so evil. And it's not just lip service, as was explained by you're too much better. And everyone should be following Ali and Electronic Intifada and the people who work there and Lowkey. People should be following them everywhere, not just on Twitter, but elsewhere. So this is about Palestine. This is about preserving ethno-supremacism and Western domination over West Asia and North Africa. And of course, it has global implications because this is where the energy is. With regards to Iran, all I can say is that during the period when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, we lost a president to terrorism, Western terrorists that are based in the West. Our president and prime minister and thousands of people were murdered by the MEK terrorist organization, which today has offices in the West, in all Western capitals. It's like, well, I wanted to say Osama bin Laden's Al Qaeda having an office in Iran, but now Al Qaeda and ISIS, they control the country and the sanctions have been removed. Extraordinary, isn't it? That the United States and the West welcomed these people. They removed the sanctions, but they're strangling Cuba. Cuba is a threat to the United States, but ISIS and Al Qaeda are not. So I wanted to say Al Qaeda, doesn't that logic doesn't work. So these terrorists are based in the United States and Europe right now. They killed our president, they killed our prime minister, they killed the head of our judiciary, many government ministers, many parliamentarians in the 1980s, 17,000 people. They fought as foot soldiers for Saddam Hussein. Iran didn't fall. Later on, Imam Khomeini, who was the founder of the revolution, he passed away. We had a new leader the next day. We have a constitution. This is a civil society with thousands of years of civilization. And our constitution has functioned very well for us so far. And that is what the United States is so upset about. So I have absolutely no doubt that Iran will come through. Iran will be victorious. The resistance will be victorious. And my expectation is that young people across the region have to put pressure on their governments to cut ties with the regime, to cut business with the regime, to break off diplomatic ties. There should be no embassies. There should be no trade. There should be no oil flowing to the regime from any country in this region. And people from outside the region, they should push hard to. Everyone should start pushing. People have waken up across the world from different races and religions and cultures. We should evil empire and to bring down and to end this monstrous regime.
Yeah. So Ali and then Lowkey, you can close this out. Ali, please.
Just very quickly, I want to say that for many decades since World War II, the Western Zionist empire, as I'm just going to call it, was able to wage wars of aggression, of annihilation against people around the world without people in the imperial core feeling it. People in the West could enjoy a prosperous life, they could enjoy a peaceful life, they could have law and order, and they really didn't feel the effects of these distant colonial wars. That's no longer the case. Of course, the primary victims of this empire are in Palestine, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, and now in Iran, and of course other places as well. They're the ones who are literally being burned to death, babies being burned, people being bombed in their homes, university professors being murdered, hospitals being destroyed, all the horrors we know about. But even in the imperial core now, people are paying the price, and they're paying the price in their well-being. The fact that there is a growing economic crisis where people can't afford basic housing and basic goods and healthcare, but also the pretense of democracy is being taken away and being replaced with real they're taking the velvet glove off the iron fist. So everything is being torn down for the sake of Israel and preserving this U.S. hegemony in the region. Free speech, one of the most cherished Western values, we're told, is being trashed and abolished for the sake of Israel. Academic freedom, great universities. The West had great universities, and people from all over the world came to them, from China, from Iran, from Russia. It's acknowledged that they were great universities. They are being destroyed and neutered and turned into basically just government departments, all for the sake of suppressing speech and scholarship about Israel. The international system that has been built up since World War II in the wake of the European Holocaust of European Jews is, things like the international law, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court. Well, you could question whether that was really intended to be a genuine court, but to the extent that it was, all of it is being trashed and torn down for the sake of Israel, for the sake of protecting or advancing the hegemony of the United States. So, yeah, people in the West are not yet being burned and bombed the way people in Iran and Gaza and Lebanon are, but nobody is safe from this. The tactics they're using now, if they can just murder people in their homes in Tehran, in Gaza, in Lebanon, there's really no limits to what they can do. And I think people have to wake up to that, and how we can collectively mobilize globally to win back our freedom, win back our sovereignty and independence. I don't have all the answers to that, but I don't think people can just go on blithely consuming and pretending everything is going to be okay. It's not going to be okay unless people are, first of all, aware and willing to show solidarity and support for each other to stop these monsters. They've shown us they will stop at nothing. They could watch 20 months of babies being blown to pieces in Gaza. And what Dr. Marandi said, every time I listen to my colleague Nora Bowers-Friedman on the Electronic Intifada, she starts with a 20-minute news report from Gaza. I start that show in good spirits, ready and prepared. By the time Nora gets to the end of her news briefing, I can barely keep my composure because I don't get used to the scenes of horror that Israel is inflicting in Gaza every day. But our monstrous leaders, the predators who rule us, they're happy with it. They like it. They're sadists. And this is not a world any of us can continue to live in like this. It's got to change.
Yeah, Lowkey, to you.
Absolutely. And the change is something that is happening every single day, and we are all part of it, and we are all pushing back. In this country, it's important to remember that while the government is on one side of the equation, the young people have a perception which is radically different from theirs. And daily I am meeting people who tell me that. You look at the development of a group like Palestine Action and what has been achieved. It's really astonishing. You never would have dreamed of this existing just 10, 15 years ago at the time of Operation Cast Lead, for example, in line with the extremities of what the Zionist movement is trying to achieve and how fantastical the aims are. The resistance against it is growing in a million different ways all over the world. And really that has to be the aim of our generation, to give everything we can so the future generations do not have to live in this way. It also seems that the technological advancement is a real double-edged sword, because on one hand, it has, off the back of the defeat in Vietnam, the United States goes about creating the internet. And it's worth remembering that at the time when they were building the ARPANET, as it was called, the precursor to the internet, In universities like MIT, where it was being built, you had sit-ins and protests against it because of how it would invade people's privacy. The basis for the US military building it was to avoid a situation like Vietnam, to render more visible a population they were trying to rule, and to be able to predict their behavior and face off this type of movement in Vietnam, which ultimately defeated them. And we're seeing that now having such a difference in this war. The access to information is massive for the Israelis. Just in the last few days, you've seen the Iranian government say very clearly that their citizens should delete WhatsApp and Instagram because it's sharing their information with Israeli intelligence. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg is one of the funders of the Zaka organization, which created all those horrendous lies about October 7th, which were used to justify genocide. You look at WhatsApp, the founder of it, Jan Koum, was not only a funder of AIPAC, but also a funder of several organizations that build settlements in the West Bank. So the relationship is very close and has always been quite close, but they've been able to get into the homes and the minds and the subconscious of so many of us in different ways. And they are using that information to target people. And it's horrific. From Gaza to Tehran, we've seen that be the case. So on one hand, the development, the technological advancement has given great advantage to Israel, actually, because the house always wins. Ultimately, they own the game, even in a country like Iran, even to some extent in a country like China, they have some access through these apps and through this technology. But then on the other hand, what technology has done is render visible the suffering in a way that just wasn't the case. Many people look at the picture that came out of Vietnam of the naked girl running down the street as being a game changer. I often remember Martin Luther King seeing that picture and then going on to make his speech about the United States being the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, and coming out strongly against the war in Vietnam. Just that picture was enough to affect it. And you see also the conclusion that they reached off the back of Vietnam is that you shouldn't let journalists in to a place where we are pummeling, because then the pictures will get out. And so hence why you had with the Falklands War, with the Gulf War, the only journalists that could go were embedded with the militaries that were pursuing that war. Whereas now with Gaza and with the phones, this is the contradictory point. On one hand, the technological advantage helps Israel massively in terms of getting the data and targeting human beings. But then on the other hand, that visibility of the suffering has certainly revolutionized and radicalized generations of people across the world in many different languages. There are people today who are passionate about the Palestinian cause who did not know what Palestine was before October 7th. It's simply a fact. There are people today who are passionate about being on Iran's side of this conflict, who previously their only window into understanding all of this would have been the BBC. It would have been the BBC, which would have been actively miseducating them and propagandizing them into a pro-Zionist position, and they wouldn't even know they were being manipulated. So that is really a quantum leap in the changes on both sides of this equation. What that will mean going forward, I don't know. What kind of world will be shaped in and around that, I don't know. But what I do know is that the social imbalance that Zionism has posed in Palestine is almost impossible to sustain. Pre-October 7th, it could only be sustained by constant violent fascism. And post-October 7th, it can only be sustained through permanent genocide and permanent war with everyone in the region that has any issue with what is happening. And Israel's just not going to be able to achieve that. It has maximalist, fantastical aims far beyond its means. Not succeeded in emptying Gaza, is not going to succeed in emptying the West Bank, it's not going to succeed in knocking down Al-Aqsa, is not going to succeed in dominating a government in a country that has almost 100 million people in it. And that's why they've resorted to this kind of low intensity, light invasion of mercenaries. But some of these mercenaries in Iran that are being picked up, they're not ideologically wedded to the idea of Zionism. These are people that are maybe collaborating for monetary reasons, betraying the country for other reasons. But when questioned, what they will reveal about what the Israelis are doing will be massive. When you look at this idea of Afghans or Indians in some cases who are being kind of enlisted into the Zionist project in Iran and being discovered, these are not people deeply committed to the Zionist project. They're going to give more information. And so you're going to have more revealed about what Israel is trying to do, and it's not going to last. You've built up these small mercenary forces in the country, but they're falling away. They're melting away as we speak. They're being uncovered across the country as we speak. So all of that is going to fall apart in time. And Israel is ultimately a house of cards built on sand. It's a paper tiger. It's a paper tiger. It can bully and kill unarmed people and kill children on an industrial scale. Yes, we get it. We get it. You've been doing this forever. And now you have technology that makes it even more easy for you. And as Ali said, these are sadists. There's no other way. There's no other conclusion you could derive from this. A group of people that take pleasure in killing children en masse and watching it is a sadistic society. It's a sadistic society. There's no other way that you could rationalize what is happening. But that's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be sustainable. The shadow of Gaza that it casts on Zionism will be fatal. It will be fatal. It will defeat it. And what they didn't understand is that you don't win a war by killing the weakest in the population. You win a war, or a war could be considered one, by the largest amount of humanity agreeing with your point of view. Now, if that is the case, Israel is killing itself. Zionism is committing a long suicide. And, it's horrendous and horrific to see. And all of our humanities have been degraded by seeing this. But there are those who have sacrificed and who have spent decades building up their ability to respond, to deter, to defend, and to resist. And it's those people who have written their name in history that we must look to and understand this situation from their perception also.
Very well said. Very well said. This has been an incredible show, an incredibly important show, everybody. Be sure to hit the like button before you go. Everyone, please give, if there was a round of applause in the streaming scenario, do that for Professor Mohammad Marandi, because he is joining us right now from what the United States and Israel are turning into a war zone. There's lower internet now these days for security reasons. There is cyber attacks happening as we speak. Those are the latest reports. And of course, Professor Marandi's life is threatened by the very monsters that we have been talking about. Professor Marandi and gentlemen, any final words before we head out of here today?
I just want to pay tribute to not just the martyrs, great figures like General Soleimani, who once said that we are the nation of Imam Hussein. And some people should give these Zionists and these neocons and Trump a book so that they know what this means. Or tribute to Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the master of resistance. Or tribute to Yahya Sinwar, whose image we will, sitting on that chair, we will never forget, resisting till the last moment. The resistance, or General Hajizadeh, who built this missile program after General Tehrani Muqaddam to be able to strike the heart of darkness, the real darkness of humanity. But beyond them, I want to pay tribute to everyone who is a part of this resistance. Those young students, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, in the United States, who raised their voices in defense of the oppressed. Those activists who've been active and who've been raising their voices and suffering as a result, people who've been punished, those people who've been killed innocently across the region. But most importantly, I'd like to remind everyone once again that the genocide, the Holocaust in Gaza is ongoing. It is happening now as we speak. We have to put pressure on governments to end their relationships with the Israeli regime. We have to create further awareness. Our work starts now. Everything that we've done so far, put aside. Our work starts right now.
Indeed, indeed. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. We will keep you all updated about what is going on as this escalates further. Should it escalate further, be sure to hit the like button before you go. I'll be back on Friday afternoon. I will be sure to send you the information for that. Hit the like button. Also, in the video description is all the places you can find Professor Mohammad Marandi, Lowkey. You can find Ali Abunimah's work at Electronic Intifada. Be sure you are supporting their work. Be sure to hit that like button before you go. Video description is all the places you can support this channel. And until next time, take care and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.